Derek thought those 14 properties were his future, until one folder revealed they'd never belonged to him at all. I want to tell you about the first one, because everything that happened later, the LLC, the deeds, the lawyer's letter, the discovery meeting, all of it traces back to one duplex and one weekend in May of 1995. Margaret and I had been saving for 2 years. I was 33. She was 31. We had Claire, who was 4, asleep most of the drive up the mountain in a car seat with a juice box leaking onto the upholstery. The duplex on Elk Mountain Road had a sagging porch and a back door that wouldn't latch and a kitchen the color of nicotine. The owner was a man named Mr. Hadley who'd lost his wife the year before and didn't have the heart to keep the place. He sat at his kitchen table and slid the keys across to me before I'd even signed anything. "You'll do right by it," he said. He didn't ask. He just said it. Margaret painted that kitchen the next weekend. Pale yellow. She picked the color because she said it looked like the inside of an egg, and an egg was a thing that held something that was about to start. I told her that was the most Margaret sentence I'd ever heard her say. She laughed and got paint on my forehead. We rented it out 3 weeks later to a young couple expecting their first child. 2 years after that, we bought the second one. A small 4-unit on the south side of Asheville. Then a triplex in Henderson County. Then a duplex Margaret found in the paper one Sunday morning in Madison. Each one we walked through together. Each one she had an opinion about. The 5th one, she made me walk away from. She said the floor felt wrong under her feet, and when the inspector came out 2 days later, he found rot under 3 of the joists. I never bought a property after that without walking it with her, until the year she got sick. She died in March of 2014. I didn't buy a property for 2 years after that. The portfolio sat at 12. I couldn't make myself walk one without her opinion in it. Then in 2016, an old friend called me about a 4-plex in West Asheville that the bank wanted to move quietly. I drove out there alone. I stood in the kitchen of the upstairs unit. I waited for the feeling Margaret used to give me. I didn't get it. But I got something else. I got her voice in the back of my head saying, "Henry, you're being a fool. Buy the building." I bought the building. Then I bought the next one. By the end of 2016, I owned 14. I want you to understand what those 14 looked like, because Derek never did. He saw a spreadsheet. I saw a map of 2 decades. The triplex in Henderson County was the one I bought the year Claire started kindergarten. The 8-unit on Patton Avenue was the one I bought with the money I made framing the new wing of the Methodist Church in 2003. The little single family on Sunset Drive was the one Margaret found in the back of the paper, 2 months before her diagnosis, and she walked me through it on a Saturday afternoon when she was already tired, but didn't say so. Each one had a story. Each one had a Margaret in it somewhere, even the ones I bought after she was gone. That's when my attorney, Louise Renshaw, told me to put my house in order. Louise had been my lawyer since 1987. She drew up Colton and Sons. She drew up the buy-sell when my brother left the company in 1999. She handled Margaret's estate. She is 67 years old, 6 feet tall, and she has never in her life used 3 words where one would do. She sat across from me in her office in late January of 2017 and told me I was running 14 rental properties out of my personal name, like a man who'd never met a tax attorney or a slip-and-fall plaintiff. "Henry," she said, "one bad bathtub and you lose the duplex on Elk Mountain Road." I didn't say anything for a minute. Then I said, "Tell me what to do." She told me. Family LLC. Single member. Me. All 14 deeds transferred. Operating agreement that named me as sole member, sole manager, sole everything. She said it would take 3 weeks to draft and another 2 to record. She said it would cost about $4,000 in filing and recording fees. She said it was the cheapest insurance policy I would ever buy. We signed Colton Properties LLC into existence on February 9th, 2017. Every deed transferred. Every recording stamped at the county. Louise put the originals in a fireproof box in her office and gave me a clean copy set in a manila envelope I took home and put in the bottom drawer of my desk under the leather ledger, under Margaret's egg-yellow kitchen. 4 weeks later, my daughter married Derek Harmon. I want to be careful here. Because Derek wasn't a bad man at the wedding. I want you to understand that. He was a good-looking, polite, organized man, 31 years old, who worked at a regional bank doing something with commercial loans. He stood up at the reception and gave a toast about Claire that made my sister cry. He shook my hand with both of his hands. He called me sir for the entire first year I knew him. He had a notebook he kept in his jacket pocket where he wrote down birthdays and anniversaries. He brought me a bottle of bourbon every Christmas. The first time he saw the portfolio spreadsheet I kept on a yellow legal pad, he asked if he could photograph it with his phone, and then he asked if I'd ever considered moving it into a software platform. I said no. He said, "Of course, sir. Whatever works for you." In April of 2017, 8 weeks into their marriage, I asked Derek if he'd consider managing the properties for me. I was 55 years old. I was tired. I'd been collecting rent in person for 22 years, and my back hurt every time I climbed the steps to the upstairs unit on Elk Mountain Road. Derek said yes before I finished the question. Louise drew up a one-page management arrangement letter. It described his role as independent property manager. It said he had no ownership interest. It said he'd be paid a management fee on a monthly basis. He signed it at my kitchen table, in blue ink, with a fountain pen Margaret had given me on our 25th anniversary. Claire was making coffee at the counter. She didn't read it. She didn't need to. Her father had handed her husband a job, and her husband had said yes. I gave Derek the keys that afternoon. 14 sets on 14 labeled rings in a canvas tool bag I'd had since 1991. He did the job. I want to say that plainly. For 6 years, Derek did the job. Tenants liked him. He returned calls. He scheduled maintenance the same week, not the same month. He raised rents, but only at lease renewal, and only by amounts I'd already approved. He kept a clean spreadsheet. He sent me monthly reports on the first Tuesday of every month, and they were always on time, and they were always correct. I'll tell you about one tenant in particular because it matters later. A woman named Doreen Pickett, 71 years old, widowed, lower unit of the Elk Mountain Road duplex. Margaret had rented to her in 2012, 6 months before Margaret got sick. Margaret had liked her. Margaret had said more than once that the lower unit on Elk Mountain Road belonged to Doreen for as long as Doreen wanted it. After Margaret passed, I'd held to that. The rent on that unit had only gone up twice in 11 years, both times by less than the inflation rate. Derek knew this. I'd told him. He'd written it in his own notebook in 2017. Doreen stays. Doreen's rent moves slowly. 1-year leases only. He'd nodded, and he'd done it that way for 6 years. If he had stayed exactly that man, none of this would be a story. He would still be managing those properties today. I'd still be getting reports on the first Tuesday of every month. Claire would still be married. Margaret's egg-yellow kitchen would just be a kitchen. But people don't stay exactly the same. Especially not people who hold a set of keys for 6 years. The first sign was small. So small I almost missed it. It was a Sunday dinner in October of 2021. Claire had made a pot roast. Derek was carving. The conversation drifted to the Henderson triplex, where one of the units had been vacant for 7 weeks, and Derek had finally placed a tenant the week before. He was telling the story over the table, and partway through he said, "Yeah, the vacancy rate on our portfolio is actually pretty good for the market." Our portfolio. I didn't say anything. I watched Claire's face. She didn't notice. She was passing the green beans. I watched Derek's face. He didn't notice either. The word had come out of him without his permission, the way truth sometimes does. And then the conversation moved on to whether the Panthers were going to fire their coach. I went home that night. The house was quiet the way it has been quiet since 2014. I went into the den. I turned on the green banker's lamp Margaret had bought me for my 40th birthday. I took the leather ledger off the shelf. I opened it to a fresh page near the back, past the maintenance records and the rent rolls. And I wrote in the ledger. Just one line. October 17th, 2021. Derek said our portfolio at dinner. I did not call him. Not yet. I want to tell you why I didn't. Because some of you are going to wonder. You're going to think, Henry, you should have corrected him right there at the table. You should have said, "Son, it's my portfolio." And maybe a younger man would have. A man with more years in front of him than behind him. But I'm 64 years old, and I've been to enough funerals to know that some corrections are best made on paper. Words at a table get forgotten. Words on a page do not. So I wrote it down. And I waited. Over the next year and a half, the words started showing up more often. Not constantly. Not in any way Claire would notice. But I noticed. I noticed when Derek told a contractor over the phone in my kitchen, "I'll need to check with Henry on the budget for our roof job." Not Henry's roof job. Our roof job. I noticed when he told a tenant at a Christmas open house, "We're really proud of how this building turned out." I noticed when he started sending me monthly reports with a header at the top that said, "Colton Properties, Operations Update," instead of "Colton Properties, Management Report." It was a small change. A header. Most men wouldn't have caught it. I caught it. I wrote it down. There is a difference between being old and being unprepared. I want to pause here because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, "Henry, why didn't you just sit Derek down? Why didn't you say, 'Son, I love you'?" But the words you're using are wrong, and I want to make sure we're on the same page about what is mine and what is yours. It's a fair question. The honest answer is, I almost did. 3 or 4 times. Once in November of 2021, after he used the word "we" twice in one phone call about a furnace replacement. Once in the spring of 2022 when he sent me an annual summary that listed his name above the section title. I picked up the phone. I put it back down. I told myself I was being a paranoid old man. I told myself Margaret would have wanted me to give him the benefit of the doubt. I told myself my daughter loved him. I told myself words at a dinner table are just words. I was wrong about that. I want to say that plainly, because some of you may be in the spot I was in 3 years ago, and I don't want you to make my mistake. Words at a dinner table are not just words. They are the first draft of what somebody is going to claim later, in a letter on heavy cream paper, with a number on page 3. The second sign came in early 2023, late February, just past the 6-year anniversary of the LLC. Derek had been pushing me for a year and a half to put the portfolio into a property management software platform. He'd brought it up over Sunday dinners. He'd brought it up in monthly reports. He'd told me 3 times that the spreadsheet I'd been using since 1996 was, and I'm quoting him, "leaving money on the table." I told him every time the same thing. I said, "Derek, the spreadsheet has worked for 27 years. The spreadsheet stays." In late February of 2023, he opened an account with a property management software company anyway. I found out about it the way you find out about most things at my age, by accident. A welcome email landed in the portfolio's general inbox, the one Louise had set up under Colton Properties LLC, and the welcome email was addressed to Derek Harmon, owner-operator, Colton Properties. I logged into that inbox once a week to clear out spam, and there it sat, on a Wednesday morning, in bold, unread, owner-operator. I sat at my desk and I read that email 3 times. I didn't call him. I didn't email him back. I opened the leather ledger and I wrote a second line. February 28th, 2023. Derek opened a property management software account in the entity email. Listed himself as owner-operator. Did not ask. Then I closed the ledger. I want to be honest with you about what was going through my head at that moment, because it wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something quieter than anger and heavier than disappointment. It was the feeling a man gets when he realizes that the person he trusted has been telling himself a different story than the one they were both supposed to be in. Derek didn't know I'd seen the email. Derek thought he was making a small administrative move. But the word he'd typed in the box, owner-operator, wasn't an administrative move. It was a self-portrait. It was him telling a software company who he thought he was. He thought he was the owner. I didn't correct him yet. I didn't change his access. I didn't cancel the account. I just made a note. The receipt did not scare me. The signature did. Over the next 6 months, I started watching closer. I didn't tell anyone. Not Claire. Not Louise. Not even my brother who calls me every Sunday from Tennessee. I didn't want to be the man who poisoned his daughter's marriage based on a header in a software account. I just kept watching. And what I saw was a man who had started slowly and then less slowly to behave like he was running his own company. He started CCing himself on contractor emails as DH Colton Properties, not Manager Colton Properties, just his initials, like a partner. He started telling tenants he'd have to check with the office instead of have to check with Henry. He started in late spring of 2023, signing maintenance approvals up to $1,500 without notifying me. The management arrangement letter had given him approval authority up to $500. Anything over that needed my sign-off in writing. He'd been respecting that limit for 6 years. In May of 2023, he stopped respecting it. I noted everyone. I did not call him. The third sign was the one that moved me, because the third sign came from outside the family. The third sign came from a tenant. In August of 2023, on a Tuesday afternoon at about 3 o'clock, my home phone rang. Not my cell. My home phone, the one Margaret and I had had since 1989, the one almost nobody calls anymore except my brother and the occasional telemarketer. I picked up expecting a robot voice trying to sell me a Medicare supplement. It was a woman named Doreen Pickett. She was 71 years old. She'd been renting the lower unit of the Elk Mountain Road duplex, Margaret's first kitchen, for 11 years. "Henry," she said, "I just want to make sure I'm doing this right. Derek had me sign a 3-year renewal last week, and I just wanted to thank you for the rate. But I also wanted to ask, because my late husband always said to confirm these things, are you sure about 3 years? Because the last 2 times we just did 1 year at a time, and I didn't want to lock myself in if you had other plans for the building." I sat down at the kitchen table. I held the phone for a second. I said, "Doreen, would you mind if I called you back in about an hour?" She said, "Of course, Henry, take your time." "Henry, take..." I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The reason that phone call mattered, and I want you to understand this, because this is the moment where the small things became a pattern I could see, was that Derek and I had a written agreement, going back to 2018, that no lease on the Elk Mountain Road duplex would ever be written for more than 1 year. Not because of Doreen. Because of Margaret. Because that building was the one I might want to do something with someday. Maybe move into the upper unit when I got tired of the house. Maybe gift it to Claire. Maybe keep it as a duplex forever as a reminder of an egg-yellow kitchen. I'd told Derek that explicitly, in writing, in 2018. 1-year leases. No exceptions. He had just signed Doreen Pickett to a 3-year renewal. Without telling me. On the one building in the portfolio, I'd specifically asked him to leave alone. That was the second thing I wrote down. I wrote it under the second line in the ledger. August 15, 2023. Derek extended Doreen Pickett's lease to 3 years on Elk Mountain Road without notification or authorization. Direct violation of 2018 written instruction. I called Doreen back. I told her the rate was fine, and the renewal would stand because I would not put a 71-year-old widow in the middle of a family argument. But I told her gently that if she ever had another question about a lease on that building, she should call me first, before signing anything. She thanked me. She told me Margaret had been kind to her in 2012 when she first moved in. I told her I knew. I told her Margaret had been kind to everybody. Then I hung up the phone, and I went into the den, and I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, and I took out the manila envelope Louise had given me in 2017, and I put it on the desk next to the ledger. And I sat there for a while. I don't know how long. The light moved across the floor. The house was quiet the way the house has been quiet since 2014. By the time the phone rang again, I already knew. I already knew Derek had stopped seeing himself as a manager. I already knew he was building a story in his head about ownership. I already knew that story was going to end somewhere ugly. What I didn't know yet was when. I found out 4 weeks later. It was September 12th, 2023. A Thursday. Claire called me at 7 in the morning. She was crying. She told me she and Derek were separating. She said he'd told her the night before, sitting on the edge of the bed, that he wasn't happy and hadn't been happy for a year. She said he'd already called a divorce lawyer. She said she didn't know what to do. I told her to come over. She came over. She sat at the kitchen table where Derek had signed the management arrangement letter 6 years before, and she cried, and I let her. I made coffee. I didn't say anything about Derek for the first hour. I just let her talk. She told me he'd been distant. She told me he'd been working late. She told me she'd suspected something for a while, but she hadn't wanted to know. After about an hour, she said something that made me set my coffee cup down. She said, "Daddy, he told me last night that the divorce is going to be complicated because of the properties." I said, "What properties?" She said, "Your properties." He said he's been managing them for 6 years, and that means he has a stake in them. He said his lawyer told him he could probably get a third. I did not change my face. I did not raise my voice. I sat across from my daughter, and I drank my coffee, and I asked her one question. I said, "Claire, when did Derek say he talked to a lawyer?" She said 2 weeks ago. I nodded. I told her she was going to be okay. I told her the properties were not her problem, and they were not going to be her problem, and the only thing I needed her to do was take care of herself. I told her she could stay at the house as long as she needed. I told her I loved her. After she went upstairs to lie down, I went into the den. I picked up the phone. I called Louise Renshaw. I said, "Louise, it's Henry. I need you in the office tomorrow morning." She said, "What's going on, Henry?" I said, "Derek is going to file a claim on the portfolio." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Louise said, "Henry, bring the ledger." The letter from Derek's attorney arrived 8 days later, by certified mail. I signed for it on the front porch. I took it inside. I didn't open it on the porch, and I didn't open it in the kitchen. I opened it at the desk in the den, with the ledger on one side and the manila envelope on the other. The attorney's name was Bradford Linville. He was based in Asheville. He was 41 years old. I looked him up. He had a website with a photograph of him standing in front of a window with his arms crossed. He specialized in what his website called complex domestic asset disputes. The letter was 4 pages. It was written on heavy cream paper. It used the word equitable 9 times. The argument was this. My son-in-law Derek Harmon, Bradford Linville wrote, had served for 6 years as the de facto operational head of the Colton family's residential rental enterprise. He had, in that capacity, exercised substantial operational control. He had built and maintained the tenant relationships. He had supervised maintenance. He had, in the absence of any formal LLC structure or corporate boundary, functioned as a partner in fact, if not in name. Furthermore, he had not been compensated at a level commensurate with his contribution. Therefore, under the doctrine of implied partnership, and Bradford Linville cited 3 North Carolina cases here, all of them from the 1980s, Derek Harmon was entitled to a proportional equitable interest in the portfolio. Bradford Linville's letter requested, in the spirit of an amicable pre-litigation resolution, a meeting at which Mr. Colton and his counsel could discuss a settlement. The number Bradford Linville used in the letter on page 3 was $8,750,000. The portfolio's appraised total value as of June 2023. He was claiming a third of it, almost $3 million. I read the letter twice. Then I read the line that mattered most. The line that said, in the absence of any formal LLC structure or corporate boundary. Bradford Linville did not know about the LLC. Derek had not told his attorney about the LLC. There was only one reason Derek had not told his attorney about the LLC. And it wasn't because Derek was hiding it. It was because Derek did not know. I sat at the desk for a long time. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 4. I could hear Claire upstairs, on the phone with somebody, her voice low and tired. I picked up the leather ledger. I opened the front cover. I looked at the original deed to the duplex on Elk Mountain Road, May 11th, 1995. Hadley to Colton. The signature was in fountain pen. Margaret had been standing next to me when I signed it. She'd been wearing a green sweater. She'd had paint under her fingernails from a kitchen we hadn't started on yet. I closed the ledger. I did not call Derek. I did not call Bradford Linville. I called Louise. I said, "Louise, set the meeting." There is a difference between being old and being unprepared. If stories like this remind you that quiet people are not weak people, subscribe to my channel for more stories. Because sometimes the strongest response is the one nobody sees coming. The discovery meeting was scheduled for October 19th, 2023. A Thursday. Bradford Linville's office in downtown Asheville. 10 in the morning. A conference room with a long table and a window that looked out at a parking deck. Derek was already there when Louise and I walked in. He was sitting next to Bradford Linville. He stood up when I came in. He did not meet my eyes. He had lost weight. He was wearing a suit I didn't recognize. He'd had a haircut that made him look older than 37. He sat back down without saying anything. Bradford Linville stood up. He shook my hand. He shook Louise's hand. He gestured for us to sit. He had a leather portfolio in front of him and a stack of exhibits clipped together with a binder clip. He had a yellow legal pad with notes in tight handwriting. He looked organized. He looked confident. He looked like a man who had read his own letter twice and believed every word of it. He started his presentation. He laid out the implied partnership argument the way it had been laid out in the letter. He cited the 3 1980s North Carolina cases. He walked through Derek's 6 years of operational control, tenant relationships, maintenance scheduling, rent collection, lease negotiations. He used the phrase de facto partner 4 times. He used the word commensurate twice. He talked about how Derek had received only a management fee, well below what an equity partner in a portfolio of this size would have earned. He turned to Derek at one point and said, "Mr. Harmon, would you describe your relationship with the portfolio over the last 6 years as that of an employee, or as that of a partner?" Derek said quietly, "A partner." Bradford Linville nodded. He turned back to Louise. He said, "We believe a fair settlement would be in the range of 1/3 to 40% of the appraised value, subject to negotiation. Given the absence of any corporate structure that would have clarified Mr. Harmon's role at the outset, we believe the implied partnership theory is well supported." He sat down. There was a pause. The kind of pause where a man on one side of the table thinks he has won, and a man on the other side of the table is deciding when to speak. Louise reached down. She took a manila folder out of her briefcase. It was the same kind of manila folder I had at home in the bottom drawer of my desk, only thicker. She placed it on the table. She did not open it yet. She looked at Bradford Linville. She looked at Derek. Then she said, in a voice that was not loud and not soft, "Mr. Linville, before we discuss settlement, I'd like to clarify the factual record." She opened the folder. The first document on top was the Certificate of Formation for Colton Properties, LLC, State of North Carolina, filed February 9th, 2017, stamped, recorded. Bradford Linville looked at it. His face did not change at first. Then it did. Louise said, "Colton Properties, LLC was formed on February 9th, 2017. Mr. Colton is named as the sole member and sole manager. The operating agreement, which is the second document in this folder, confirms that. There are no other members. There have never been any other members." She turned the page. The second document was the operating agreement, tabbed in 3 places. She turned the page again. The third document was the first of 14 recorded deeds, each one transferring a property from Henry Colton, individually, to Colton Properties, LLC. Each one dated within 3 weeks of February 9th, 2017. Each one stamped at the County Register of Deeds. She laid them out one at a time. 14 deeds. She did not rush. She placed each one face up on the table. The conference room was very quiet. I could hear the air handler in the ceiling. I could hear Derek breathing. When the last deed was on the table, Louise said, "All 14 properties were owned by Colton Properties, LLC. Not by Mr. Colton personally, before Mr. Harmon ever managed a single one of them." The corporate structure was established 4 weeks before Mr. Harmon assumed any management responsibilities. She turned the page one more time. The last document was the management arrangement letter, April 2017, signed by Derek Harmon in blue ink. The fountain pen Margaret gave me. Bradford Linville recognized the signature before he read the words. I watched him recognize it. Louise read the relevant paragraph aloud. She did not raise her voice. She read it the way a doctor reads a result. Mr. Harmon shall serve as independent property manager for Colton Properties, LLC, with no ownership interest, member interest, equitable interest, or beneficial interest of any kind in the entity, the underlying properties or the revenues thereof. Compensation shall be by monthly management fee as set forth in Schedule A. She closed the folder. She said, Mr. Linville, there is no implied partnership here. There is a single-member LLC predating Mr. Harmon's involvement by 4 weeks, and a signed management agreement explicitly disclaiming any ownership interest. We will be moving for summary judgment. I'm telling you that now as a courtesy so you can advise your client. I will tell you what I saw on Derek's face in that moment, because I have thought about it a lot since. He did not look angry. He did not look defiant. He looked like a man who had been telling himself a story for 2.5 years, and had just heard the actual ending. His shoulders dropped. His jaw worked once. He looked at Bradford Linville. Bradford Linville did not look back. Bradford Linville was reading the LLC certificate the way a man reads a verdict. Derek looked at me. For the first time since I'd walked in, he looked at me. I saw in his face the man who had stood up at his wedding reception and shaken my hand with both of his hands. I saw the man who had brought me a bottle of bourbon every Christmas. I saw the man who'd called me sir for an entire year. I saw all of him in that one look. And I saw behind it the second man. The one who'd typed owner-operator into a software account. The one who'd said our portfolio at a dinner table. The one who'd told my daughter on the edge of a bed at night that he was entitled to 1/3 of what Margaret and I had built one weekend at a time over 22 years. I did not say anything to him. I had been waiting 2.5 years to say something to him. And when I finally had the chance sitting across a conference room table with the deeds between us, I found that I did not need to. The folder had said it. The date had said it. February 9th, 2017 had said it. There is a kind of silence that is louder than any sentence a man could put together. I let that silence sit in the room. I let Derek hear it. Then I stood up. I picked up my coat. I nodded once at Bradford Linville. I said, "Thank you for your time." Louise gathered the folder. We walked out. The summary judgment was granted on December 4th, 2023. 6 weeks later. The judge wrote a brief opinion. He noted the LLC formation date. He noted the recorded deeds. He noted the management agreement. He wrote that no reasonable jury could find an implied partnership where the corporate structure and the written agreement so clearly disclaimed one. He dismissed the claim with prejudice. Derek's side was ordered to pay a portion of our legal fees. Not all. A portion. Louise had asked for more. The judge had been generous to Derek. I did not argue. The divorce went through in March of 2024. Claire kept the house. Derek moved to Charlotte. He took a job at a regional bank, doing something with commercial loans, the same job he'd had when I met him. Claire is okay. She is more than okay. She comes for Sunday dinner most weeks. She has started painting again, which she had stopped doing in 2017. Last month, she painted a kitchen wall pale yellow. I asked her why yellow. She said she didn't know. She said it just felt right. I didn't tell her about Margaret's egg yellow kitchen on Elk Mountain Road. Some things a daughter can find on her own, in her own time. I just nodded, and I told her it was a good color and we ate the pot roast. I want to tell you what I learned from this. Because I am 64 years old, and I have been to enough funerals, and I have signed enough deeds, and I have buried enough people I loved, to know that a story like this isn't really about a portfolio. It isn't about $8,750,000. It isn't about Bradford Linville and his cream-colored letter and his 3 1980s cases. It isn't even really about Derek. It is about the line between responsibility and ownership. Derek had responsibility. I gave it to him in April of 2017 on a Tuesday at my kitchen table, with a fountain pen Margaret had given me. I gave him 14 sets of keys in a canvas tool bag. I gave him my trust. I gave him 6 years of my time. I gave him my daughter, in a sense, when I let him into the family and called him son. I did not give him ownership. I never gave him ownership. The LLC said that. The deed said that. The management agreement said that. The fountain pen said that. But he wanted ownership. Slowly, quietly, the way men sometimes want things. And once a man decides he wants something he doesn't have, he will start telling himself a story about how he already has it. He will say our portfolio at dinner. He will type owner-operator into a software account. He will sign a lease he wasn't authorized to sign. He will call a divorce attorney. He will sit in a conference room and let his lawyer use the word commensurate twice. And the story will feel real to him, all the way up until somebody opens a folder. If you have given somebody responsibility in your life, a son, a daughter, a son-in-law, a niece, a nephew, an employee, a partner, I am not asking you to distrust them. I am asking you to make the line clear, on paper, with a date, with a stamp, before the responsibility starts, not after. Because the day will come when somebody will have a reason to misread the line, and on that day the only thing that will protect your work is the thing you wrote down. Margaret painted a kitchen pale yellow on a weekend in 1995. 22 years later, on a Thursday in February, I signed a piece of paper in Louise Renshaw's office. Those two acts were the bookends of the same building. The kitchen was love. The LLC was protection. A man needs both in this life, if he wants the work of his hands to outlast him. I keep the original deed in the front of the leather ledger, the one from May 11th, 1995. Hadley to Colton, fountain pen. I keep the LLC certificate in the back. February 9th, 2017. State of North Carolina. Stamped, recorded. Between them I keep 3 lines in my own handwriting. October 17th, 2021. February 28th, 2023. August 15th, 2023. 3 red flags. 1 folder. 1 date. Derek is doing fine, by the way. I want to say that. I want you to know that this story doesn't end with him broken. He's at a regional bank in Charlotte. He has his own apartment. He has, I'm told, a girlfriend. He sends Claire a birthday text every year. She answers politely. He has not asked to see me since the conference room, and I have not asked to see him. We pass through each other's lives now the way 2 strangers pass through a hallway. I do not hate him. A man my age does not have the energy for hate, and Margaret would not have wanted me to spend it that way. What I have instead is the ledger, and the deeds, and the kitchen, on Elk Mountain Road, where Doreen Pickett still lives, paying her rent on the 1st of the month, into an account that belongs to Colton Properties LLC, sole member Henry Colton. I drive past that duplex sometimes. Not often, 2 or 3 times a year. I park across the street, and I sit in the truck for a minute. And I look at the upstairs window where Margaret stood on a stepladder in 1995 and laughed at the paint on my forehead. The window is still there. The paint behind it is not yellow anymore. Doreen had it redone in a soft gray about 8 years ago. But I can see through the gray to the yellow underneath. I can see Margaret on the stepladder. I can see the radio on the windowsill. I can see the future we were building, 1 duplex at a time before either of us knew there'd be 14. Derek looked at 14 and saw a number. I look at 14 and see a weekend. That, in the end, is the difference. That is the line. That is what the LLC was protecting. Not the money. The weekend. If you ever gave somebody responsibility without giving them ownership, I want you to think about how you made sure the line stayed clear. Drop a comment below and tell me. Tell me what you wrote down. Tell me what you kept in a folder. Tell me whether the line held when the day came that somebody tried to cross it. Because someday somebody will try to cross it. They always do. And on that day, the quiet thing you wrote down 20 years ago, the date, the signature, The stamped page in the manila envelope under the leather ledger. That quiet thing will be the loudest voice in the room. I never raised my voice. I raised the consequences.